So without further ado, I like stories, and I've invited Glenn Rory, one of your deacons, to come up and tell you his story.
Morning, church. I'm here with a certain amount of trepidation because last time I was here, the Lord gave me a very embarrassing lesson in humility. The day that I sort of talked about my walk with the Lord, it was in conjunction with Adrian Hoken. And Adrian, she went first and she came up and she was armed with her talk and she gave it. And when it was my turn, I sort of started with sort of a throwaway line. I sort of said that Adrian had come really well prepared with a lesson, but I was going to wing mine. Anyway, later on in my talk, I forgot something that I never ever thought I would, and it was the most embarrassing point, I think, in my life. So today, I've sort of come well prepared. Donna just wanted me to talk about my Christian walk and what led me to the Seventh-day Adventist Church after being brought up in an Anglican background. So I suppose my walk first started when I was 13, and a friend of mine invited me to go to a Billy Graham crusade. And before that, like, we weren't a church-going family, but even as little kids, I can always remember my mother reading us Bible stories and praying with us of an evening. So anyway, off we go to Billy Graham, and the Holy Spirit moved upon us to go forward and give our lives to the Lord. And the funny thing about Billy Graham, after you go forward, Billy's not particularly worried who got hold of you. So I didn't realise at the time, but the crowd that grabbed me were Jehovah's Witnesses. So I sort of did the Bible studies that they sent me, and then they sent me their periodical, which was called The Watchtower. Now, looking around, most of you are fairly aged, so you probably can remember The Watchtower. And The Watchtower used to have lots of illustrations in it with subliminals in them. And in the drawings, there'd be like demons, or they'd portray Christ with one sandal and a hoof. And so anyway, I used to get my copy of The Watchtower, but for some reason or other, I could see the subliminals. So when I sort of took it and pointed it out to my mother, she couldn't. So I sort of traced her out, and I'd show her the photos of sort of the demons that would be portrayed in the folds of the garments and one thing and another. So that was enough for her. I was off to the Anglican church, and I'd been baptised in Anglican. So for the next 5 years, we sort of went to the Anglican church. And now I've lost my train of thought, so it's really handy to have my notes. Yeah, anyway, moving along. So I attended church for sort of about 5 years until I was about 18, and then went to work, discovered the underwater world, became an avid spearfisherman, and then I joined the fire brigade at 26 years of age. So you can imagine, with my first sport being spearfishing and my profession being a firefighter, there were many times in my life where my prayers to the Lord were, "Save me, Lord, because I'm in danger again." So life went sort of quite swimmingly for me. I can look back and see where the Lord had led me right from the time. And even though I wasn't walking closely with him, I still sort of had a relationship. And he'd sort of guided my life, guided me into my profession, which I thank him avidly for again and again. Anyway, in about 1999, I found myself sort of divorced, and my sort of life just came crashing down. Like everything I'd worked for, everything was in a shambles. And I was renting just across the road from the Anglican Church at Brook Avenue. So I found my way back there, and when I went back there, they were holding an outreach program, which I sort of participated in. Anyway, at the end of the 12 weeks, we had a weekend away, and a friend of mine on that weekend, she came away from it with the gift of tongues. Now, I know the Seventh-day Adventist Church looks on gifts of tongues sort of slightly differently to other denominations. But I talked to her about it, and she was sort of quite happy with her gift, even though I wasn't completely convinced. So that week, I prayed and fasted, and I asked the Lord that he'd have to give me something to sort of base my faith on. But I knew for one thing I didn't want the gift of tongues. So I think it was the 2nd October 1999, I've gone to bed, and at about 11 o'clock. Anyway, not long after that, I sort of woke up, and that in itself was really strange for me, because in those days my head hit the pillow and I didn't wake up until the alarm clock went off. So I'm laying there wondering why I'm awake, and I'm counting the waves on the beach and listening to the owl fly outside the window. And after a time I thought, well, this is strange, I'm not going back to sleep. So I've rolled over, and I've turned on the light as I've rolled over, and I've looked at the clock, 1:35 in the morning. And when I rolled back up, I could see these words written on the wall, "For God so loved the world." Then the Lord spoke to me, 2 short sentences, but they were very, very relevant. The first one was, he said to me, "You've always thought me unfair. How much fairer can I be? I sent Jesus." And that was right too, because in all that time, I'd always thought the God of the Old Testament was sort of unfair. And the words that I heard were as clearly as what you're hearing my voice. They weren't words that I just heard in my head, it was clearly audible. And the second thing, the thing that I forgot last time I was up here, in those days I never fully understood salvation by grace. I thought that I sort of had to earn my salvation sort of for having a spotless character. And that was a bit of a worry for me, because I could never ever see myself attaining that sort of level. And the second thing the Lord said to me was to stop agonising about sin. That was the reason that Christ died. So, moving on from there, I prayed for 2 things. I prayed for, one, that my son gets returned to me, and the second thing was I prayed for my own home, which I never ever thought I'd have again. And within 12 months, one led to the other. My son came back to live with me, and from there on, I was able to purchase another home. So you have to realise too, in the weeks leading up to my experience with the Lord, I was searching with every fibre of my being. And I'm always remembered the words of Jeremiah 29:13, I think it is, that sort of says, when you seek me with all of your heart, you will always find me. And I was seeking with every fibre of my being. And then we sort of get to the point where I ended up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. One day there was a knock on the door, and I went to the door, and here was Helen Stubberfield. And Helen was handing out the Beyond series. So I told her she was preaching to the converted, but I took one anyway. And I watched it, and she came back the next week and gave me next week's edition. And this went on for a while, and we'd have a chat after when she'd drop it off, sometimes quite long chats, and I never realised then that poor old Bob was sitting in the car waiting for her. So she invited me along one day to church to listen to Grenville Kent. Grenville Kent was talking about the God of the Old Testament. And because I'd had issues with the God of the Old Testament, I thought, well, that might sort of interest me, which it did, and answered a lot of questions. So from that day, I was never particularly... I'd become very disillusioned in the Anglican Church because it was sort of like 50 minutes of repetitive... what's the word I want? It's gone, but it doesn't matter. So, as I've said, I was becoming disillusioned, and I quite enjoyed my visit. And I think that visit was about 11 years ago, and I've been back here ever since. I studied with Vern Parmenter, 3 really enjoyable months studying the Bible, and then Vern baptised me, and as I said, I've been here ever since. So that's how I went from being an Anglican to a Seventh-day Adventist, which I have never regretted since. Funny thing, I was just reflecting the other day, the Christian friends that I've lost from sort of switching from one church to the other have been sort of those that were the most devout. And I sort of think it's pretty hard to have close Christian friends in other denominations because we're always sort of a bit of a front to what they believe. Like our beliefs are wholly and solely based on the Bible, where theirs are a sort of a blend of tradition and the Bible, so there's always that little bit of confrontation. But that's just what I found in my life. The rest of you might not find that. You might still have really close Christian friends in other denominations.